When the sun is bright and the blossoms are fat on the trees, you know the only thing that you have to do: appease the old gods with some folk horror. Hello, if you're new here, I'm Sinead. This is my spooky corner of YouTube, where I talk predominantly about spooky books, sometimes spooky films, and general things that I have seen during the day that might be considered spooky. It's usually crows. As requested, this is part 2 of my dive into great folk horror books, that wonderful subgenre of horror literature that is beautiful, that is brutal, that is full of nature and love and land and sacrifices and paganisms and a lot of blood. Yes, quite a few people are a fan of folk horror books, so I'm very pleased to bring you some more. And don't worry, I also have a video coming up very soon about folk horror films. Unless you're watching this in the future. In that case, it's already out. It's already there. So go and... what's happening? I love folk horror as a genre. I've read quite a few folk horror books. I'm still reading more and still discovering some every day practically, with suggestions that are being sent to me or new publications. It's really having a resurgence at the moment. And I've also seen a lot of folk horror films, so it's an area that I just love to indulge in. I'm going to be running through some more books that fall into the folk horror category that I have read and I think are worth your time. And this includes quite a few new books as well. If you haven't already watched part 1, I would suggest you go and do that, because that's where I give a little explanation, for those who need it, of what folk horror is really. And also, you could be watching this video and yelling about a lot of books that I've already mentioned in part 1, some really good ones too. Before I get into the books, a quick recap about what is folk horror. You're dealing with land, you're dealing with nature, you're dealing with communities that are often suffering hardship or some perceived form of hardship. It's often all about the past, whether you've got entire communities or the story is set in the past, or there are people who are fascinated and revering the past. And you may have supernatural elements to it. You may have old gods, old entities, old things being conjured from the soil. The stories may involve some local folklore, a legend or a tale. With nature come the themes of rebirth and decay, death and destruction, but always rebirth, this sort of ever-turning wheel that is much bigger than all of us. There will be rituals, there will be sacrifice, there will be blood. I'm also going to throw in a warning here, probably what I should have put into part 1, because I predominantly like spooky gothic books most of the time, and I'm not a big fan of gore, but I do like folk horror, and folk horror is often very bloody, and it is gory. It has a lot of visceral imagery through it. It is about nature and it's organic, and sometimes that can conjure up some pretty brutal imagery. And also ritual sacrifice is a common theme through these books, so it can get a little bit hairy. Animal suffering is a trigger for me. I do not enjoy books that indulge in suffering for animals. I know it's a contradiction. People suffering and sacrifice and all that, oh, bring it on, absolutely fine. Don't you dare hurt that kitty. All I can say is, based on my personal experience, I've been triggered less, weirdly, by folk horror books than I have been by some standard horror books that suddenly just throw in animal deaths in there. It's not a hard and fast rule. You have to check your comfort zone in there, but I think it's worth mentioning. Maybe do have a check on, does the dog die, or do a little Google if you are worried about any of the elements of these books. After doing part 1, it's so encouraging to see so many people embracing folk horror and really enjoying it. And one thing that I would like to ask anyone who's watching this video and wants to leave a comment, certainly comment with more suggestions of books and films that you enjoy, but what is it about folk horror that you really enjoy? What draws you to it? Why do I love folk horror? I'm so glad you asked. I know you didn't ask, but it's my video. Why do I love folk horror? Well, why do I love horror in general? I've always been a massive fan of all things horror since I was a little girl, and my father ill-advisedly showed me horror films, and he showed me the old classics more often than not. He showed me the old ghost stories that he loved, and he read spooky tales to me because I responded to those. I absolutely loved them. I loved fairy tales, and I loved strange old tales of lore and yore and more or things. This is going to sound a bit weird, stay with me. I like the juxtaposition of folk horror. I like the contrasts of so many tropes that we associate with horror melded into one. I love gothic horror because it's dark and it's moody and it's atmospheric, but I love folk horror because a lot of the time it's very bright. You've got beautiful sunshine, or you've got really lovely natural landscapes and surroundings, and from that can come terror. I also like the way nature is often portrayed in folk horror, because nature is bigger than all of us. It's the fact that people through the centuries, through different cultures, through different generations, All are trying to maintain control over their lives and trying to find the secret of how they can control everything. That's a common theme, I think, in a lot of folk horror. You've got instances in some of the great stories where people are trying to conjure old gods or old entities, thinking that that is the right path, that they will be rewarded by bringing these things back. But nature is bigger than them, and nature has been around far longer, and the roots and the trees and the plants that grow will keep coming back, and they will keep returning. They are unstoppable, and trying to control them is a folly, is man's folly. You cannot control the wind, you cannot control this sort of destruction. Folk horror can be very bleak, the landscape can be very bleak and brutal and unforgiving. There's also a lot of very human themes to the stories, and it deals with grief a lot, and it's a subject I'm fascinated with. I've experienced grief. That's a really weird way of saying it. Horror, all types of horror, can help you tap into feelings, the saddest feelings inside of you in a really fantastical way, I find. If you aren't someone who wants to confront head on, the sadness inside of you, horror can give you great metaphors for that. And I like that in folk horror because you do have people who are dealing with grief, and there is something about, even in the most horrifying circumstances, nature continues, nature carries on, and to try and hold on to a moment of time will be at your peril. Enough of such babbling, let's get to the books. A book that a lot of people mentioned in the comments of part 1, I read it very recently, and everyone is right about how good a folk horror book it is. It is The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher is an author I really, really enjoy, and I thought that The Twisted Ones was immensely enjoyable and a really good slice of folk horror. But as with most T. Kingfisher books, this book also has a little wry humour all the way through it, the way it is written. Kingfisher is very good at creating characters who sort of don't take themselves too seriously, even in the midst of horror, and it's really relatable, and it makes the story so enjoyable, even though this story was terrifying at points. In The Twisted Ones, you have a woman called Mouse, that is her nickname, who goes to her grandmother's house to clear it out after her death. The grandmother was not a nice person, Mouse and her did not get along, but she is there to clear it out. The house is quite rural, it backs onto a forest. The house is rammed full of junk, but amidst it she finds the journal of her grandfather, and the grandfather's journal is absolutely full of scrawlings of strange ramblings referring to something in the woods. This book is full of horrors of the woods, of strange creatures from the woods, of effigies, of flitting shadows across the lawn, of places that are seemingly impossible to get to and maybe impossible to get back from. It is a story about loss and about friendship, but it is also just a great horror book. It's really well done. And I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that Mouse does have a dog with her. The dog is a huge part of the book. You know from the start of this book, the dog is fine. It is right there in the opening pages. Mouse is reflecting on the story from the opening chapter, and the dog is next to her. And that, thank you a million times over, T. Kingfisher, for assuring us that the dog wasn't going to die. It doesn't mean that there's not moments of peril through this book. There really are, and you are frightened for Mouse and for the dog. It is a really great book. Another author who is doing great work in the folk horror genre is A.M. Shine, the Irish writer, the author of The Watchers. The Watchers I listened to a couple of years ago on audiobook, and it's one of my favourite horror listens. I loved it. In The Watchers we have a young woman, Mina, who is travelling in Ireland, and she goes into a huge section of forest in Connemara, and this is off the map. It's an area that no one knows about, and she goes very deep into this wilderness and gets stuck. Her car won't start, her phone won't work. She ends up wandering through the woods, and just as the sun is about to set, she comes across a stone structure, a stone shed with a huge glass panel wall. There are people inside it. They manage to call her inside, and they reveal that they are stuck in there because of the Watchers outside. There are things in the woods that if you are outside after dark will absolutely destroy you. But these things like to watch the people in the room. Mina ends up in this stone room with different people who have all wandered into the woods at different points. The Watchers is a great story of Irish folklore, and of real tension all the way through. It does not let up from the start. There are moments of real peril, real terror, and also all the relationships that build in the book between the different characters who are stuck in the center of this forest wondering if they're ever going to get out. It builds to a great climax. The Watchers is more modern folk horror because it is set in the present day, but you are dealing with contemporary characters stuck in the middle of nature, surrounded by old creatures that have links way, way, way back in the past. This is a good modern folk horror, and it's very frightening. I've not read the sequel to The Watchers, Stay in the Light, but I intend to, but I have read another book by A.M. Shine, The Creeper, and this has folk horror written all over it. This is a story of two academic researchers in the modern day, and they are tasked to go and find an Irish village that is hidden away in the wilderness. Very few people know it exists. The people who live there are completely cut off from normal society. They are living in their own time period practically. And these researchers find the village and they stumble on in there determined to get to the bottom of their primitive lifestyle. But what they don't know is that the creeper is there as well. A figure that stalks at night, that has the villagers bolting their doors and shuttering their windows. For it's said the creeper will see you 3 times. Each time it will get closer, and the last time it sees you, well, very suspenseful and very creepy. The Creeper is a great slice of modern folk horror. A book that is so beloved by so many people. Every time I mention the words folk horror, people jump in and go, are you going to talk about this book? And it's Pine by Frances Toon. This is a wonderfully scary, creepy book that has a series of genres melded together, but absolutely qualifies as folk horror in my opinion. It's the story of Lauren and her father who are living in the Highlands of Scotland. It opens with Lauren being driven to a Halloween party by her father, and a woman is found standing in the middle of the road, and the father sort of takes her into the car, and then she sort of disappears the next day. Lauren's mother disappeared several years ago, but no one seems to be telling Lauren the truth of what happened to her, though there's hints that they may know more than they're letting on. But Lauren, being a young girl, seems to be being shielded from the truth. But then a teenage girl goes missing from the area, and as the adults start wondering who might have secrets and might be responsible, Lauren is looking to her tarot cards and wondering what might actually be at work in the wilderness around them. This is a book that feels more like a thriller, but there are definitely folk horror elements to it. There is something uncanny all the way through the pages, and it plays out in this very icy, very bleak, very tense story, but beautifully told from the perspective of Lauren, who is quite a young girl in the story and is not privy to all the information around her. There are some scenes in a shack in the forest that had my heart racing. Shacks in the forest are never a good thing. Just stay away from them. It's like stairs in the woods. Don't go in, just leave them alone. Leave them alone. You want folk horror with witches? Okay, it has to be The Year of the Witching. I finished this book just before recording this video, and yes, yes, yes to this as folk horror, as a bit of fantasy, folk horror, thriller, witchiness. It's got a bit of everything in it, and predominantly I really enjoyed this book. We have our protagonist Emmanuel living in the community of Bethel, which is incredibly religious and incredibly puritanical. It's a fantasy setting, so it's got a mixture of sort of medieval and Victorian in my head. This is a land that had previously been tormented and cursed by witches who have since been banished to the dark woods. Emmanuel's mother fell in love and had a child with another man of another race, and she brought disrepute onto the family, and she was banished into the dark woods where it was said she communed with the witches. While Emmanuel has been living as a devout member of the community, she ends up learning that she is tied to the witches of the Darkwood and to the vengeance that they wish to wreak upon the land. She starts to learn about her past as terrible things start to befall the community of Bethel, and she might be their only hope of salvation. I'd previously read House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson, which I loved, a great book about vampires. When I started Year of the Witching, I wasn't sure where it was going, but I ended up really enjoying it, even though there's a lot going on in the book, and it has a couple of notes from me, but really overall, it's a strong folk horror and fantasy book with a lot of action in it. You have this community of Bethel that is being oppressed by the church, but then you also have the witches in the forest who are trying to encourage Emmanuel to come over to to their side, but also their terrible vengeance and their anger at the world, at these men that have dominated society and that burned their ancestors. It is a really great story about witchcraft. There's a lot of amazing imagery about the trees and nature coming back and seeking revenge. You have the pagans versus the church. It ticks all the boxes and ended up being a very enjoyable book. This is your friendly reminder that if you are enjoying all this folk horror chat, please subscribe to my channel, save this video, share it, like it. It means that I can pay the crows a living wage. And by living wage, I mean shiny things. This is a book that's described as Wicker Man meets Final Destination, and that's fair. It's Lute by Jennifer Thorne. A few people tried to suggest that Jennifer Thorne's book Diavola might sneak into folk horror. I loved Diavola. It's probably one of my favourite books that I read last year. Absolutely brilliant. I could go on about it for ages. I don't quite think it's folk horror, but Lute certainly is her first book. The premise is you have the island of Lute, where every 7 years, 7 people have to die. On the island, everything is wonderful. Off the island, there is a war going on. It doesn't have a set time period, so it's a little bit fantastical in that sense. Our protagonist, Nina, is married to Lord Treadway, who is part of the family line that has protected the island for years. But the day is approaching. All the characters in it are sort of busily preparing for the day. It's just part of their way of life. This day where 7 people will die ensures that Lute will be preserved, it will be protected, it will continue to thrive. We don't know from the start if this is supposed to be a ritual, if this is going to be accidental, if something happens. We have the story of Nina's past as well as the story of the different people on the Isle of Lute coping with what the day means for them and the fallout if anyone dies. The story overall is a really strong one. The book I enjoyed. I think it took a little while to get going and felt a little bit convoluted. But when the action ramps up, when the day arrives, okay. Ooh, they're tense. It is a book that certainly owes a lot to folk horror tropes. For that reason, it's an interesting read. Another book that owes a lot to folk horror is The Burning Girls by C.J. Tudor. A brilliant thriller, very frightening, and like most of C.J. Tudor's work, it has a supernatural element running through it that creates a delicious sense of tension. It's also recently been adapted into a TV series about a female priest, who comes to a new village with her daughter. They are moving away from something, but this village has a lot of darkness in its past. It has a past of burning martyrs. It has a church where bad things happened, and there certainly seemed to be a presence lingering in the area. It is a really tightly packed thriller with many threads, many elements to it. But at its heart, there is a folk horror story, this reference to the burning girls of the past, to effigies that are being left in this church, to bad things that have happened as a result of religion and an eschewing of pagan ways, and is a genuinely unsettling and pretty frightening thriller. Some more folk horror books that are on my list that I've not yet read but deserve a mention. Everyone who's told me get on with reading Harvest Home, I hear you. I will be reading it this year. I'm leaning a little bit towards saving it for September, October time, but we'll see. One that I've just started on audiobook is Withered Hill. This author in particular is getting a lot of shout outs and a lot of love in the comments of my videos on folk horror. Withered Hill looks like a brilliant story. Also, I believe they wrote Scutler's Cove, which is another folk horror story, but that's much more sea-based, coastal-based. If you've read these stories, just weigh in if you think they're good. Sitting on my shelf, a very short novel that I really have no excuse not to read is The Green Man of Eschwood Hall. This is a book all about the Green Man lore. It is being championed as a great example of folk horror, a short, sharp book. Has anyone read it? Would you recommend? An author I've not read any books from yet, and I really need to get on with it, is V. Castro. A lot of people have recommended The Haunting of Alejandro. Please excuse me if I've not pronounced that right, but apparently this is a great Mexican folk horror book about the legend of La Llorona, the crying woman. Excuse my pronunciation again. I love that piece of folklore though. Love that folklore, and anything that introduces me more to different folklore from different countries, I'm all over that. I've also heard very good things about Knock Knock Open Wide, which is an Irish horror book all about Irish folklore. I haven't read too much into it, but I have seen a lot of good reviews for it. If you've read it, did you like it? And I appreciate everyone who's shouting out about the author Phil Rickman. I've not read any of his books. I understand December is amazing. People recommend it to me every year, and I need to get on and read some of his work. So that's another collection of folk horror books that you might want to sink your teeth into. Some old, some new, some weird, mostly wonderful. This is just a small collection of recent ones that I have read. I'll keep bringing you more as I find them. If you feel like it, jump in the comments and explain why you love folk horror. What is it about that genre of book that draws you to it, or just your love of horror in general? As ever, if you've liked this video, please save it, please like it, please subscribe to my channel so I can keep terrifying you in snuggly ways. Stay spooky, bye-bye.